Just a small disclaimer, I know that this video is a very long video and I would advise you to speed some sections up if you'd rather not see it in real time. But I felt like this one was an important one for you to see just how long it can take to paint with watercolours and give you a true sense of just what is involved in creating an image like this. When we fast forward the video for you, sometimes to save time, it actually gives you a false impression that things are much quicker than they are. So I have left this in real time, and as I just mentioned, please do feel free to fast forward any sections that are a little bit too tedious for you. Thank you for watching. I hope you really enjoy it. I enjoyed the process of working with the watercolours this way. Hi everyone, today I'm going to colour this lovely page, and it is from Wondrous by Karron, the recent release from Blue Angel Publishing, and it's really lovely paper in this book, so I enjoy colouring in these books a lot. So that is the page that I've chosen that I am going to paint with watercolours, and I just want to do a little bit of an explanation on that before I get started. So the lovely people at Royal Talens Australia have sent me some products to try, and they are featuring me as their feature artist on their Instagram account for August. So if you are on Instagram, head over to Royal Talens Australia and have a look at their Instagram page. And they've sent me a box of lovely goodies to have a play with, which I am thoroughly enjoying. And I'm going to paint in watercolours on this page here. So they've sent me the set of 12 colours in the Van Gogh watercolour set. This is the lovely tubes of colour. So I'm just going to put that aside, and I will be working on this page as I just mentioned. So I'm just trying to get you situated in a good place. And I like to use paper towel for cleaning my brush off and keeping this side of the paper clean. I'm going to be using a ceramic palette. I've got this lovely big one from Meaden here and a smaller ceramic palette here that I'm going to be using. I've got plenty of water to hand, water pot, couple of jars of clean water and some brushes, and I'm going to get started. So get comfortable. And I'll lay a few colours out into my palette here because I'm not sure what I'm going to do, and I may actually want to do a little bit of colour mixing. So I'm going to start with yellow ochre. This is colour 227, and I'm not going to put a lot out to start with because watercolour in tubes goes a long way. Just going to make sure I get my lid back on properly because I don't want my watercolours to dry out. My hands are cold today, so I'm having a little bit of trouble with, using my hands. Payne's Grey 708. And working with watercolours like this is a slower process. If I was using the pocket box, for example, it would be a lot quicker with the hard watercolour in the little pans. But this is partly what I enjoy about painting with watercolour, is actually the whole process. So choosing your colours and getting set up and started is all part of it. I might have a little bit of burnt sienna. And I'll do that in a smaller well because I'm not sure how much of that I'm going to need. And at this point I think I might have a little bit of Madder Lake Deep, which is 331. The burnt sienna is 411. Oh my goodness. My fingers just don't want to work today. Just hang on one moment. So we had a few warmer days, milder days, temperature-wise, recently, here where I live. And today we've got a cold front hitting again with a vengeance. So I'm really feeling it in my hands today. And that will do for starters, I think, till I know what I'm doing. I'll start on the Gogh, and then we'll work out from there. So I'm actually going to use a pipette to get some clean water into those little wells there as well for mixing the colours. Now you can use a little pipette. Sometimes I just use a brush, and you know, the wet brush, and I use that to mix the colours and pick the water up with. But let's see, what will I start with? I don't think I'll start with too big a brush until I know what I'm doing. So what I like to do is I like to have a couple of pots of water handy, because I use one for picking up clean water and one for rinsing off the dirty brush. And I know that might seem like I'm, you know, being really obvious there, but if you've never painted with watercolours before, and particularly never mixed colours from a tube before, this might all be new to you. So bear with me if you are an experienced watercolourist and you feel like I'm stating the obvious, but I'm actually, you know, thinking about everybody who may be starting just from the very early stages through to people who are well versed in it. So, okay, so that's, I just got those colours started with a bit of water. And now I'm going to try mixing something that I think might equate to a bit of the skin tone that I might want to use. So that's a little bit of yellow ochre there, and the Madder Lake Deep. And I like to just mix up some lighter colours to start with, you know, very well diluted, because you can always add more colours and build colour up as you go. And everyone has their own way of doing just about anything art-wise, so if this isn't the way that you like to work, that's fine. And I'm not actually telling anyone that they have to work the way that I am, but you might like just, you know, to watch how I do things and then see whether that might be something you want to try for yourself. So I'm just going to do a really light wash of the yellow ochre to begin. I might go over that area because they're probably going to end up with greens and so on. So, and then I'm going to pick up the little bit that's darker with the burnt sienna and so on. And remembering that this girl is a fantasy character. So Karron likes to do a lot of mystical, fairy, fantasy type people. And there's a little bit of clean water in there just to help move things around. And I'm trying not to disturb the surface of the paper. This paper will cope with a little bit of water, but it doesn't like to be obviously agitated with too much rubbing of the brush or anything else on wet paper. No paper likes that, so just trying to keep things pretty light to start with. And watercolour usually dries a little bit lighter. So when you first apply it, it might seem a bit deep, and then as you keep working, it will dry lighter. Now what I like to do too with the paper towel is when I work a little bit too heavily like that, I will use some clean water to move it around, and I've just got the paper towel in my hand to dry the brush off, and I can lift off excess water or colour that way as well. So trying not to go too dark too soon. The whole idea with watercolour for me anyway personally is lots of light layers until I feel really confident that I know my colours well and I know what's going to happen. I haven't actually worked with these paints too much just yet, so I'm still learning and feeling my way with how vibrant or pigmented the colours are. And in recent times I've been quite lazy, relying on water-based mediums that I've worked with water brushes. So every time I sit here with a paintbrush in my hand, I have a little bit of a learning curve till I start to realise just how much water I need and how much I can apply to the paper and so on. So whether you're a beginner or someone who's worked with watercolour a lot, what you will find is that every time you try something a little bit different, whether it be a different book, different paper, different brand paints, you know, there's always going to be a small period of adjustment and getting comfortable with your supplies again. And you know, people that paint every day and they're using the same things every day build up a really strong knowledge base of what their supplies and so on can do for them, and they don't go through this sort of period of adjustment like I am here now. But for most of us, even, you know, people who've painted for quite some years will tell you that there's a lot to learn with watercolour. Watercolour can surprise you, but it's really, really rather pleasant to keep learning and keep working with watercolour. So you may be able to see there, hopefully. Let's just check here. So I've got my palette on a bit of an incline, so the colour that I mixed there is blending in with that. So I'm getting a bit of a different mix there to what I originally had. And one thing that I will mention, if you are going to try and mix some of your own colours with watercolour, if you've got a big area that you're going to paint, so if I wanted to do the background for example, I need to make sure I mix sufficient amount of paint or colour up to get me through that, because trying to mix that exact same colour again at a later stage can be very difficult. It's not impossible. You know, you can keep working at it until you get a colour that is very much the same as what you mixed the first time. But if you don't have any experience with that, you may find it very difficult to match that colour again. So it's always advised that, you know, you make plenty of a colour that you think you're going to need, because yeah, it can be difficult to remix it. Some people have an uncanny eye for colour mixing, and you know, it will be no problem for them. But you know, that we're not talking that's the general population of watercolourists, and many people find it frustrating that, you know, that's something that they don't like, is that if they haven't mixed the right colour, they can't match it. They get very frustrated with that and give up. But that's something that I think colouring books are good for. I'm not actually doing a commission or trying to get a likeness of a real person here. So that means I can keep layering. You know, if I start off with a nice light layer of colour, I can keep building up and adapting and changing and, you know, trying things out as I go. It's a little bit different, of course, if you're doing a commission and the client obviously wants a good likeness. You know, you can't change their skin tone completely just because you can't mix the colour and you want to keep going. So for me with colouring books, that's not a concern. And you might be able to see there that just using a damp brush, you can lift some of that colour back off and move it around a little bit. So because it's such a miserable day today, it's gone very cold, very grey, very dark. I did my jobs this morning that I needed to get done, knowing that I wanted to sit here this afternoon and do a little bit of painting. I like to get rid of all distractions when I know I'm going to sit and paint like this, because I want to really immerse myself in the process and enjoy what I'm doing. So this is a number 6. It's a Robert A. Wade Neef 970 Taklon round, and it does form a reasonable point, so it's allowing me to get into some small areas here, but big enough that I could do some bigger washy areas. So that's the Payne's grey there, mixed in with a little bit of yellow ochre and a bit of burnt sienna. So, you know, it's not a colour that I can say to you, you know, mix X amount of this with X amount of that. Watercolour is a little bit of an experimentation that you need to play with until you find the colour that you're happy with. And as I say, for me to reproduce that same colour again can be tricky. So therefore it's even trickier for me to tell you precisely how you should mix that colour. And of course I have to try and remember to leave myself a little bit of time for things to dry thoroughly. And not keep overworking when things are wet too. So I'm thinking what I'll do here is a little bit of a grey underpainting. We do already have grayscale in this book, so I need to be careful that I don't make her skin too dull. But I might do a bit of a grey underpainting and then come back with some warmer layers once that's all dry. And Karron is very good at telling you where shadows and shading is needed, because she has all that grayscale there. For somebody starting out, that's one of the trickiest things, is knowing where you should be shading things and so on. And it might be nice to try and get this a little bit dramatic, so that's why the grey might be nice. And I like Payne's grey because it's got that really lovely sort of rich undertone that's bluish. So it has a bit of life about it. and mixing it with burnt sienna and ochres and so on, you can get some really nice colours. So all I'm doing really at the moment is just looking at where Christine has left the grayscale for us and deepening that up and making it a little bit more dramatic. So while I'm waiting for that to all dry, we'll come down here, and I think we might give her a red. This looks like a little cape over her dress. Oh, actually there's some skin there that I've missed. So let's just put a little bit of warmth into that. So you can see that I haven't mixed that exactly the same as what I did up there, but that's okay because our skin isn't all one colour. And where light and shade and so on, light and shadows hits your skin, the colours that you're wearing also reflects onto your skin. It can change how your skin tone looks, so you don't have to have everything, you know, like a saturated block of colour, because that doesn't look natural anyway. So just taking that little bit up to there helps to stop the break, you know, so it doesn't look like she is two-tone above the brooch and below the brooch. So just move that a little bit. So I'm going to start down here with some red, and I'm actually going to wet that area first with a little bit of colour. Now this book is sort of off-white, it's not a bright white, and I kind of like that, especially with the watercolours. I think if you want to use some muted or vintage colours, it can look very nice. And also it just helps take that starkness away when you're adding your colours. So to start with, I'm just doing a bit of a light wash here. I'll worry about doing shadows and contours and so on later. So I don't want this first layer to be too dark, because this will be the highlights eventually. So this base layer, the light layer, is what will be the highlights on the completed page, because I try not to use white if I can help it. So if you feel that that is too bold and too strong, you can then put some clean water in like that, and you can lift some colour out, and then lift the colour out with the clean brush and then put it onto your paper towel. And you can do that and lighten up areas. And I like to wet the paper first before I apply the colour. And that isn't something that everybody who watercolours does that way. But I like to do it that way because I'm very much in the camp that likes all the watery effects. So what is known as cauliflower blooming or blooming is a big no-no for some people, especially with landscapes and maybe on faces. A lot of people don't like that, but personally I do. And by wetting the paper first and then dropping the colour in, it allows the colour to bleed and blend. So if I go for a much more bold colour, I haven't diluted it so much, and I put it into that wet paper there, you can see how that blends, and it gives a completely different look to how I applied the paint over here. And I could leave that to dry that way, or I can use clean water and drag the pigment, encourage the pigment to move where I want it to move. Or I can leave it to sit on the paper and dry in its own way, and then come back to it when it's dry and see how it looks and work with it from there. Now you may see here there's a little bit of resist happening, so where there is a lot of grayscale printing, there's printed ink sitting on the paper here, the watercolour pigment isn't able to soak into the paper the same as it is over here where it is completely virgin paper. So that is something to keep in mind when you're painting over grayscale, that the actual print does influence how your product is going to sit on the paper and work on the paper. So for example, I could choose to use that paint sort of in a more pigmented way in all of these darker areas if I wanted to. Or I can let it dry and come back and work in layers and, work in layers and deepen the tones, working gradually in layers. So, there's lots of different ways that you can work with watercolour. And because I quite liked the way that looked there, I'm just going to do it over on this side as well. This part of her arm would be a little bit sort of darker and deeper in tone than these areas where the light is hitting them. Also keep in mind, I am not using watercolour paper. So this is just a colouring book, and watercolour paints will behave very differently on good watercolour paper, even bad watercolour paper, but they will work very, very differently to what it is here on this sort of colouring book paper. And it's not to say that you can't do it, it's just that it will have a slightly different result, and you might have to use different methods to get the effect that you're looking for. So I'll let that area dry now and see how that dries up. Now this top that she's got underneath, I'm guessing it's the top of a gown. I'm thinking that I might like a really deep blue. So I'm going to try Ultramarine Deep. And I'm going to have a play with some different colours with the Payne's Grey and the Burnt Sienna and just see what I can achieve. It may not work, this is part of watercolour and colour mixing. Doesn't always work first time. So this is going more like a brown. Almost like the Payne's Grey actually. So let's put a little bit more blue in there. So you might be able to see the difference from the original ultramarine to what's mixing up there now, and that's looking quite nice. So again, some clean water. So I need to be careful not to get too close to where I have the red, or it's just all going to bleed in together. And I may need a smaller brush. So I could have done this really delicately, as in a lacy, lightweight fabric, but I was thinking it might be nice to actually try and portray it as a heavier, maybe, you know, like a velvet or a heavier brocade sort of fabric. So once I've demonstrated the different ways that I like to paint with watercolours, I may go quiet for a little while and speed some of the footage up if it becomes a little bit repetitive. So for now, I'm not going to touch the lacy bit. I'm not sure how I want to paint that, so I'm going to carefully come to the edge, and I'm going to let this dry until I've decided how I'm going to portray this very lacy edge. In fact, looking from this side to this side, that needs to come up to here maybe. The lacy edge could be a different colour. So if you work quickly enough while the paint is still damp, you can make adjustments and move things around like this. But once that paint starts to dry, you will get hard edges. And that might not be what you want. And again, I think just a little bit more colour in that bit. And a little bit more colour over here. So quite often, because of the way that I work, I will have a very, very fine white line between the different areas where I've taken the colour up to, and then stopped so that the colour does not blend into and bleed into areas like the red here that I don't want it to. And I can always come back with a smaller brush later and tidy some of those details up. Now this is not for everybody. I know that years ago when I used to go to classes, there were a few of us liked to paint this way, and the teacher used to wring his hands with dismay that we weren't doing it correctly. But we liked the results that we got working this way, and other people didn't. So it's all very much personal preference, as everything we do artistically is. And particularly so, I keep reiterating this, but it very much is my belief that especially when we're painting in colouring books like this, we're not necessarily going to display this in an exhibition. We're not going to be trying to sell it. It's pretty much for our own enjoyment. And so therefore, however you choose to paint, you get a result that you like and you're happy, then that's all that matters as far as I'm concerned. So that's going to need to dry a little bit now. Now I'd like to give her blue eyes, or actually I might give her Payne's grey eyes. So I want a smaller brush. I've got some very tiny brushes here. This is a number 1 round. And I'm just going to work, hopefully, carefully and lightly. And again, Christine's done all the work for us and shown us where the highlights are. She's also put a slightly darker line around the edge of the iris, as some eyes have a darker ring around the iris. Just make sure I don't put my hand into any wet paint. And I'm going to save the very dark black areas until last. But I like to get the eyes in because that just helps me a little bit. I feel that the eyes are very important in a portrait. And I find that once I get the eyes in, it just helps me get a feel for the face a little bit better. And all the rest of the details need to wait until that skin on her face is resolved and how I want it to be. And then I can put all the details on last. Working with watercolour starts off very loosely. You're getting bases, bases of colour down first, and then you save all the details for the very end when you're putting everything together at the end. I think I'd like to sort of maybe give her silvery hair as well. So these little birds, I'm going to do them next. And let me get rid of that small brush again. So I'm going to use the burnt sienna, and I'm also going to pick up a tiny bit of blue and mix it sort of a deeper brown. And I'm going to do a base layer of that onto the birds, and then I think I'd like to bring in some blue and maybe grey. Now I think they're maybe swallows, and off the top of my head without a reference I'm not sure of the colours, but of course I do not have to do anything realistic if I don't want to. And this is a what am I looking for? Mystical sort of, not necessarily real painting the way that it's being painted. So I'm just going to do this really loosely to start with. Maybe leave some lighter areas to give me options around the eyes. Now the other thing about watercolour too is that at the moment I'm trying to stay in the lines, but watercolour can look really rather nice when the colour bleeds past the line as well. There's a lot of freedom with watercolour if you allow yourself to think of it in that way. Again, a little bit dark in places, so I'm just going to lift some colour off so that we've got some variation. I've got choice further down the track. I might want to do some a bit deeper in places too, so just put a little bit of burnt sienna in there and let it bleed. So this one up here was much more tightly controlled in the way that I applied the wash, and this one is going to be you know, a lot more random. So I just need to let some of that dry now. So I hadn't actually noticed that I've smudged the red there, so that's interesting. I'll have to try and fix that up somehow, but you know, that's what happens sometimes. So I quite like the way the colours have granulated a little bit here. So the burnt sienna with the ultramarine has granulated as it's been drying, so that's quite a nice texture. Sometimes, you know, I might nail it really early on that I like something, and I'll preserve that and maintain that as the page goes on, and then other times the page will sort of go through several incantations before I actually, you know, finally work out exactly how I want it to look. So I just thought I'd point that out to you. Now I'm going to have a go with the hair. I think I'd like to do maybe a really subtle grey or bluish grey. So the Payne's grey, we'll try that first. Maybe with a touch of ultramarine in there as well. And it's sort of going a little bit more like a deep indigo. A little bit more. And I'm just going to add a bit of extra water to dilute it a bit more. So again, just wet the hair and start with a light wash that's going to get darker as I go. Now, if you have followed me for any length of time and watched, you know, me work, you know, in other pages, you'll know that quite often I do not have a plan when I begin. So I hadn't worked out a colour palette. I had absolutely no idea how I wanted this girl to look. So what I tend to do is get started on something that has taken my, grabbed my attention, where I feel like I'd like to start, and then I just sort of keep going from there and I let it unfold. The picture basically tells me what needs to be done. Once I make a decision to start, and that first lot of colours that goes down dictates pretty much how the rest of it goes about. I just let it evolve, and I do that because I do colouring books, paint and colour in colouring books, because I don't want to work out a composition. So it's a bit of a lazy way out for me that somebody else has already worked out a composition and drawn a beautiful, you know, drawing that I wish to colour. But I have absolutely no plans ahead of time of how I want that to look. If I was creating a piece of original art and I was starting to draw, then I would have a plan in mind when I start drawing. Right from the beginning, I'd start to have some ideas of what I want to create, and then that's what I would be working towards. I'd have a goal or an idea or a plan pretty much already formed, and that would still change a little bit as things went, but you know, ideas do evolve as you start creating, but there would be some sort of plan in mind, you know, when I begin. But quite often with colouring books, no, I don't have an idea ahead of time. I know that some people in the colouring community that are on Instagram and YouTube actually leave themselves notes. They already look at a picture and they say, yes, I can see that in shades of red and blue, or this girl, I want her to have green hair, or she's going to be blonde, you know, and so on. They leave themselves notes because as soon as they look at the picture, something appeals to them about it, and that idea is sort of, you know, born, and they save notes to remind themselves of that first initial reaction that they had to the picture. But I don't tend to do that. When I get a new book, I quite often will flip through it as soon as it comes. I may have already seen a flip through on YouTube, so I'll have a fair idea of the pictures, but I like to flip through and see it for myself for the first time. Depending on the book, I might even avoid flip throughs because I want to have that nice surprise when the book arrives of flipping through and seeing all the lovely drawings. And usually that's pretty much it, you know, the book, until I come to paint or colour in it, it gets put aside and I don't plan in anything else other than, you know, I might want to, for example, this paper I know usually responds quite well to watercolour, and the style that Karron draws in very much is perfect for watercolour because she often works in watercolour herself. So her drawing style is one that, you know, very much reflects how she likes to work as an artist. So I may, you know, when it comes, look at it and think, yep, that's going to be a great watercolour book. Or it might be single-sided and I look at it and think, yep, that's going to be a great alcohol marker book. Or whatever. And I want these little plats to have some really strong highlights, so that's why I'm leaving them white for now. Come back again. It's a bit like down here, I come back when I know I've got a better idea of how I want it to look. So what I was leading towards there was that's why my working methods might look a little bit odd to some people too, because I do tend to move around the picture as the ideas strike me, and with watercolour I have to have a little bit of drying time, of course, to let the paint dry. So I don't deem myself to be a very good technical painter. I really do just do what I want to do when I want to do it. And sometimes I sort of paint myself into corners and I don't know how to fix some of the things afterwards, but I have tried to work in different ways over the years, and I always come back to working like this. So there's something to be said for going with your natural tendencies. And if I was trying to make a living from painting and getting commissions and selling my artwork, maybe, perhaps I would look at things a little bit differently. But again, it comes back to what I was saying about this is a colouring book for my own interest, and I really just want to use watercolours in the way that gives me a lot of joy, and this is what gives me a lot of joy. So I'm just starting to darken up a few areas, shadowy areas there, but I want this top area to be very light. And eventually I may even come back here and put details in with a very small brush, and the paint will be hardly diluted at all. So I'm also going to put a little bit of that into different areas of the bird's wings now. I'd like to keep this one quite light because it's at the top, and I've got the light, looks like it's hitting the top of her head, so that bird would be getting quite a bit of light as well. And then this one down here will be much darker. I'm going to go for a bit more blue in this one. Soften up those harder edges there. And now with her face, I want to do the next layer on her cheeks there a little bit warmer. So I'm just softening off a few of the hard edges there. So again, that little bit of grayscale was just resisting the paint a little bit there. And Christine's done a lot of the work here again with the grayscale and line work to indicate where the lips may be darker, where the highlights might be. Even without makeup on, our skin, our lips and so on, our features often have highlights, shadows, shading, and you know, nothing is completely solid one colour. And I'd like to bring some of that colour up here into her eye line, the brow of her eye here. I want to leave a bit of a highlight towards the top. And again, just sort of looking towards where Christine's got the shading and the grayscale for some hints of where to put the darker, deeper colour. And I'm not sure at this stage, some of this grayscale might still be quite obvious when I finish doing the watercolour washes. And that just looks a bit too harsh, so let's soften it off with a bit of clean water. And this inner part of her eye here would be a lot lighter if you think about the light coming down this way. If you struggle to know how to do shading on faces, I recommend you just have a look at lots of faces on the internet. So something like Pinterest or Instagram, do a Google search, and even sort of looking at things like if you get junk mail comes into your house and you've got models modelling clothes and so on. Although generally when it comes to stuff like that, the lighting isn't going to be dramatic on the faces because they're selling the clothes. But if you look on maybe Pinterest or Instagram or somewhere like that and get some ideas by looking at lots of faces, particularly people that have done artistic photography, or you may want to maybe look at face painting, you know, so for people who are doing cosplay and face painting, and then the photography that's been done for that might give you some really good ideas for dramatic lighting, shading, all that sort of thing, to give you ideas where to put different colours. It will also give you some ideas of some different colours that you might want to use in your skin tones, in makeup. Adverts for makeup are good because they usually have dramatic lighting as well. So think about your favourite makeup brands and maybe look for advertising and have a look at how they've photographed the models, and also look for, you know, the very dramatic lighting effects where the shadows fall, where the lighting falls and so on. It'll give you some really good ideas, because particularly for something like this that's got a fantasy aspect of it, you don't necessarily need it to look like a real person, but you'll get some really cool ideas for different colours that you can use on your pictures, and you're just looking for those little hints and prompts, you know, to get you started. Now the reason I'm doing this here with the same colours that I've put in her clothes is that I'm putting in her skin. Is one, normally if you really carefully look at somebody's skin, I mentioned it before that you know, our skin, what we're wearing affects what our skin looks like. We can have colours reflected in our skin. And also as a painting or a, you know, a pretty picture, it ties all the components of the picture together better if you use the same colours mixed in different ways for the whole picture. Ties the whole composition together. Whereas if I used a completely different set of colours to mix up her skin tone, it wouldn't blend, you know, it wouldn't complement each other quite so well. Especially if you're not very well versed at doing it and you're not very precise at doing it. Because colour theory really does have a lot to do with how successful a picture looks, the way it gels together. Sometimes you look at a picture and you might think something's not right about that picture, the colours are not right, but you can't put your finger on why. And it might come down to you've used a warm red with a cool blue, or, you know, vice versa. You're mixing your warm and your cool colours, pardon me, in a way that is not very complementary. So I just want a little bit of warmth at the top of the bird where the light might be hitting it more. Also, I like there to be a little bit of variety in the colours so it doesn't get all too much of a muchness and samey. So I'm just softening off that hard edge there that I left. So I'm a lot happier with that colour on her face now. So what I might do now, so I'll get that small brush again. And I'm going to go for the Payne's Grey. And I'm going to start. This is pretty dry here now. You've got to wait until it's dry before you come back and do your details. Otherwise it's just all going to blend and bleed and become a big mess of muddy colour. Also, I don't want the brush too wet because I'm not going to get any detail with a very wet brush. It's going to be very blobby. So you need a fine brush and reasonably dry paint. You're not too wet on your brush. It's really hard to describe the consistency that it needs to be. It is easier if you're doing a demonstration in person to show what the consistency should be like rather than describing it. And of course that just doesn't come across on a video. So what I like to try and do with eyelashes is not draw every single eyelash in, but we usually have a heavier line at the base of the lashes and then they fan out from that. It's a little bit heavy for my liking, but and the same with the bottom lashes. It's more about sort of shade and tone and shapes, because you know, unless you're really close to somebody, you don't normally see all this detail so close up on another human being. And unless they've got really, really exaggerated false eyelashes, we normally don't see every little detail of the lashes. You sort of get an overall feeling from the depth of colour and what we know about eyelashes. You know, that data bank of knowledge that we've got in our brains that tells us what eyelashes look like or what we think they look like. But on a picture you don't really need to necessarily draw every single one, and you can still suggest what is going on. So again, I want it quite concentrated for doing her pupil here, and I'm following the following the work of Christine here, where she's got some deeper areas drawn, and then she's got a quite a distinct white highlight in the eye. And can I just say, like, if you want to learn a little bit about portraiture, start paying attention to what you see when you're talking to people versus photographs. So when you're looking at somebody or a photograph of somebody, there are quite distinct highlights because the camera has caught that moment in time, and it may be that it's caught a flash in the eyes. So there may be, again, if they're having a studio photograph done, there could be several light points, so there'll be a couple of highlights in the eyes. But when you're looking at people in real life, their eyes actually look quite different. So that's another thing sometimes we get caught up with, you know, oh, this doesn't look right. And it could be because we're actually colouring a picture that somebody's taken from a reference photo versus somebody who's drawn a picture from life. So the lighting and highlights and so on are going to be very different from someone who's got a couple of, you know, lights on them to give them dramatic lighting and shading versus someone in real life in natural light. So I've got a lot of reflection on the wet paint here that I'm having a lot of trouble reading what's going on here with the eyelashes, so I might have to wait for that to dry and have a look at it without the light shining on it to make sure that I've got that right. Now also we have under the line of our eyelashes, when you look at a photo especially, but even in real life, if you think about it, you've got an eyelid that is shading the top of the eyeball. So I'm going to use that really subtle sort of Payne's grey with a bit of blue, and Christine's even suggested it here for us. So there's some shading that helps to describe the shape of the eyeball, and that there is a shadow being cast by the eyelash line and the eyelid. So you might need to, you know, pay a bit of close attention to the picture that you're colouring, how the artist has portrayed that for you. And it just needs a little bit of a careful light touch just to get those details in. And then of course she's got a very, very slight shadow underneath her bottom lid as well. And you don't want to put that too dark and obvious because she'll just look like she's had a rough night. And you know, she'll end up not looking too healthy if you go too dark with it. And that's why sometimes you need a little touch of a warmer colour just to take the edge off of making it look unnatural. So there I'm using the Payne's grey with a little touch of the burnt sienna in there, and that's going to be a warmer shadow for this crease in the upper eyelid. Just make sure my water doesn't drip everywhere there. You might not want to get this technical with your portraits in a colouring book, and that's, you know, that's perfectly valid. But I am showing you here because Christine's drawn quite a lifelike rendering, even though she's got, you know, pointy ears because she's a fae. The style that Christine has portrayed her in is quite realistic. So I'm going to the trouble of putting those details in because I feel like it matches the illustration style. If it was a cartoon style drawing, then I wouldn't be going to all of this same trouble for it. You can leave all your paint in your palette here for quite some time. If you don't want to finish this painting in one sitting, or your page in one sitting, just make sure that the paint can't get dust in it so it stays clean. So you might want to cover it up, maybe with a bit of Glad wrap or something like that, cling film. But you can leave that paint sitting there for quite some time, and all you need to do is reactivate it with a little bit of touch of water every time that you come back and you want to use it, and that way you're guaranteed to you know, have some of your mixed colours on hand if you want to come back and do some details when it's dry and you're coming back a few hours or a couple of days later. It's all there waiting for you. So again, just using the paper towel to keep dabbing off excess colour or too much water, and just keep moving the paint around with the brush for these little tiny details. So watercolour can be as fast and quick as you want to make it, or you can labour over details like I am now. You can work loosely with lots of loose washy washes. You can get a small brush and be as precise and finicky as you want. It's really quite a versatile medium, I feel. It can be a little bit difficult to master, but the trying is all the fun for me. When you've got the time to sit and actually paint, it can be very rewarding. So let's let that dry for now, and let's come back down here to this area where I need to start putting in some details for her cape. So again, what I mentioned earlier about those colours that I put down in that first wash are what are becoming my highlights here. And I can start using, you know, very diluted paint to get some precise details in. Maybe some hard edges for the details, and then feather it out into loose washes. And start to define how deep or how dark or how light I want to keep things. So if you decide you want to keep it light and airy and washy, then you need to do this with a very light touch. But if you want to start getting dramatic, like I'm starting to do with some of this, then you start to use some deeper, concentrated, less diluted pigment. And that's when I like to let it blend into the wet paper especially. And of course, if I was working on watercolour paper, it would be much more noticeable and more dramatic. So of course, if you were hoping to describe fabric that is more lightweight, you would keep your colours very light and washy here. You wouldn't be going all thick and heavy and concentrated. You would be trying to maintain some translucent, transparent washes. But watercolour doesn't have to be all about that. Watercolour can be dramatic if you wish it to be. But just remember that once it's done with watercolour, once you've gone dark and dramatic, you can't really lighten it up. You can put white watercolour or white gouache to put some highlights back in, but it's going to give it a completely different feeling. It's not going to feel like a watercolour painting anymore. It's going to feel more like a mixed media or a gouache or acrylic painting that doesn't have that same lightness and translucency about it. And that's not to say that it's wrong, but if you were hoping for a watercolour painting, then you know you've gone a bit too far with it. So if you're doing one of Karron's books, you know, she has worked out a lot of this information for you in her drawings. Her drawings don't leave too much to chance. That it's all there, it's all shaded, and it's really, really good if you're a beginner, you know, to learn from where she is putting all the emphasis. So again, you know, I put that down quite heavily and thickly with the plan that I want to now flood that with some water and let the colour blend and move and do its own thing on the paper. And generally with watercolour, what I try to do is I try to blend the colours right up to edges so that you're not outlining things, but it's that deep tone and the hard edge of the watercolour that's describing what you've got there, rather than outlining, you know, whatever this little leaf or bit of decoration here. Instead of outlining it, you take the colour right up to the edge. The deepness of the tone helps to describe what, you know, what that shape or item is. So again, down here, I'm not going to outline these bits of decoration, but I'm just going to take the watercolour right up to the edge. And then I'm going to use a bit of water here along it to help that bleed and blend out, and hopefully do so in a very natural manner so that it doesn't look like it's been outlined. And sometimes it's more successful than others. I'm having a little bit of trouble here. The bright light is reflecting off of the water and making it difficult for me to see where I'm supposed to be painting. This might end up being in a couple of parts, because I'm almost thinking it's good for you to see the real time, to see just how long it can take, because I think when you see the videos that have been sped up, although we tell you that they're sped up, I don't think you know, is that apparent when you're watching it, how painstaking some of these details can be if you're painting them in with a small paintbrush and watercolour paint. Okay, so I'm going to do some fine details in her hair now, and then I will leave it there, I think. Now I've got this really tiny little brush here. It says 10/0 Frenchville 477 Sable, and it is a really, I don't know if that's even going to focus on there, tiny brush. And I'm going to use that on the hair. And I haven't really worked this detailed with watercolour for a long time. A lot of the time with my colouring books, as I keep mentioning, I don't tend to think of them this seriously. Let's try and make sure that we have no shadows and you can see clearly. I'm just going to use this teeny tiny little brush and do a bit of work on her hair and get some details in her hair, and then I might leave it there for this video, because I've just decided in my head, as I just mentioned, that I think it's important, even if you choose to fast forward this, but I think it's really important if you get to see just how much time something like this can take. And it may not be for you that you want to put this much effort in. As I just said, quite often I don't these days. Quite often with a colouring book, I want a quick result, and I want it, I want it done, and that's what I'm aiming for. But thanks to Royal Talens Australia for giving me these watercolour tubes to try, because it's reminded me just how much I used to enjoy sitting and working in fine detail like this with watercolour. And it may not be something that I choose to do all the time again, but there's certainly going to be times where I need to do this. And when I say I need to do it, I'll just clarify that a little bit for you. I'm what is known as an overthinker. I tend to overthink just about, everything most of the time. And every now and again, it does me the world of good. I'm just using ultramarine and Payne's grey there to get a little bit deeper colour, to get into some of these areas here. So sometimes it does me the world of good to have to focus my entire attention on what I'm doing, like I'm doing here with this watercolour. And particularly so when I'm on camera as well, because I'm thinking about how to describe to you what I'm doing. And I'm trying to create a nice example for you with what I'm doing. So, I want this to turn out well. So there's very little space in my mind, my brain at the moment, for worrying or overthinking anything else. So I need to get into this area along here very carefully and get a nice smooth line there at the edge of her face. And again here on her neck. I'll just grab my paper towel. So, you know, I can't be thinking about what can I come up with. It's not too personal. So for example, you might know recently somebody vandalised my car, and because he hasn't been caught, I've had to pay for the excess on my insurance to get my car fixed, and it was finally done last week. So instead of sitting here and fixating on, you know, how awful it is that I've had to pay that money and why did he do that, and, you know, ruminate on something that's unhealthy and not going to achieve anything for me, I'm completely immersed in doing this painting and getting these edges nice and tidy, and thinking about, you know, how am I actually going to portray this hair, and what colour am I going to use, and what's going to be the best way to do that. And working with watercolour, you do need to be reasonably quick, especially if it's a hot day where you are. And this might take me a couple of attempts to work out how deep I want the colour, and also paint in all the tiny details. You know, it may not get done in one sitting. And you may not want to put that much effort or time into a page. But if you do, then perhaps watercolours might be something you'd like to try. And if you've ever wondered if you can get that level of detail with watercolours, you know, it's not just oil paints, for example, or acrylic paints that people can paint highly detailed paintings. So when I'm doing something creative like this, it could be, there'd be many reasons why I approach things in different ways, and one is that there are most definitely days where I need a quick result. I don't have the patience for this. I don't have the time for this. I might not even have the space to sit here and paint like this. And on those occasions, you know, those are the days where I choose alcohol markers or water-based markers, something that, or even watercolours in a different manner. You know, you match the style of painting or colouring to the circumstances you find yourself in, and you also match it to what type of book or picture that you're creating. So for example, a landscape, or you know, you might be painting flowers. You might be wishing to have a very loose, impressionistic or even abstract style of painting. And then perhaps maybe you're, you know, painting some architecture or a portrait, and you decide that you want to be very precise and you want a great likeness and you want to be really careful about what you're doing, then you might choose to paint in that way. And again, the trick with hair is sometimes not to want to paint every individual strand of hair, but think about where the light is hitting and the hairstyle, whether it's got, you know, curly hair or straight hair, the light is going to hit it very differently. And sometimes you don't need to be doing every individual hair, you just need to suggest, you know, blocks of colour and light and shade and so on. That suggests that. And you can portray that without having to paint every line in. And again, Karron puts an amazing amount of detail in here for us to follow. And you can make as much or as little of that information that she's put there. Is entirely up to you. So I'm feeling like I need a little break. I might have myself a nice cup of hot chocolate or hot tea or something, because it is a very cold day here today. And have a little bit of a break, because I find when you work with such deep concentration, it's actually quite tiring. And you just need that little break sometimes to get your concentration back. So I think I might leave that as part one. And I'll upload this for you to have a look at, and I will come back to you with part two, hopefully as soon as I can, but that gives you a fair idea of the start to this picture. So it's called Faye Messenger. And she's starting to really come to life now, I think, with those extra bit of darks in there. So part two, I will come back and finish the hair, the birds and all of these details, and have a think about that background. Okay, so thank you for joining me for this video. I hope that you've enjoyed it so far, and I'll see you again really soon. Thanks for watching. Bye now. Okay, so I've had a little break and come back now. So I've had to put the heating on because it has got incredibly cold. So I like the way that this is coming along. I haven't done any more work off camera. I will keep working at that as I go on, but I thought I'd move on to something different. I have got this bit of a smudge here where the red wasn't quite dry, so I need to think about the background, how I'm going to hide that. So for now, what I might do is think about doing the edging and the details here, and I might use a different lighter red for that. So we do have permanent red light, which is 370, and I'm going to put a touch of that. I'll put it into this well here. I could get another palette out, but I'm not going to. I don't need very much of that colour. Try and do this without getting paint everywhere. The fingers and hands really aren't wanting to work well today at all. So I don't need the teeny tiny little brush for this, but I do need a small brush. So just get some water in here and get started. And I'm just going to be very careful about how I paint this in. I want that little extra bit of detail that goes around. It's sort of like a binding over the edge there. We'll probably do that in a different colour. And this lighter red, I will probably end up putting a little bit of that onto the cape to tie that in as well. And I've probably got far too much of that red out there. This is something that you will find that you tend to start gauging things better the more that you use things and the more practice you have. But with watercolour from tubes, you really don't need a lot of paint and it goes a long way. So I've probably got too much, well, I know I've got too much there. I've got too much of the grey as well, Payne's grey. But I did mention earlier that you can leave these colours sitting in the palette for as long as you like, as long as you keep dust out of it. You know, if you've got it sitting on a table and it's a dusty place, you don't really want bits of dirt and dust to get in there. You can cover it with a little piece of cling wrap or anything that will cover the palette. And if the paint dries out, you just keep reconstituting it by adding water again. So again, these sorts of paints are very economical. They might seem like they're a bit of an investment when you first buy them, a bit of a financial investment, but providing that you look after them and make sure that they're airtight and so on, they will last you a long time. They'll go a long way. Alternatively, you can make your own little watercolour pans up by putting the watercolour into sorry, I'm just distracted by what I'm looking at there. You can put them into sort of plastic watercolour pans in a palette and make your own little palette up, and then the paint will eventually dry out, and you just use it like you would with any other watercolour palette by applying water to them to soften them up, and then paint with them as usual. So you've got a few different options of how you can work with watercolours. My personal preference in the past has always been to just make sure that my paint tubes are airtight, and I usually store them away in a cupboard or drawer. I don't leave them out on the table in a hot place or anything like that. And in days gone by, my old watercolours lasted a very long time. If you're unsure if you like watercolour painting, one of the things that I would advise is, if you want to try tubes, you can get just a red, yellow and blue basic primary colours, and you can mix a multitude of colours from those 3 tubes, and then you can see how you enjoy working with them before you invest in a bigger set or more colours or whatever. A lot of people like to use, basic set of colours and mix their own, maybe with the addition of a black. And if you have a preference for a certain colour range, so for example, you like a more cooler palette, then you would pick a cool yellow, a cool red and a cool blue, and you would mix those, and your range of colours are going to look a little bit different than if you had a warm set of primary colours to start with. If you're not confident about colour mixing, then of course you can invest in a larger set if you are happy that you're going to be wanting to watercolour a lot, and then you can invest in a larger set, and then you don't have to rely on colour mixing yourself. So you can change the tone by doing a wash over that base, and I'm thinking that where the light is hitting her cape, that would be a little bit brighter, and then the areas in shadow I'll leave in the cooler red. And just get clean water. So you can start playing with the different tones and have warmer areas where the light is hitting it and cooler areas where there are shadows and so on. And you can change the whole appearance of your colours by overlaying some other colours or just different shades, and that ties it in with the edge there then. And you know, I could possibly even add a little bit of that into her lips, and that changes the whole complexity again. So I was thinking about the brooch here. I'm wanting to make it a metal. So I really want to start with a lighter shade of grey. And I'll need to leave areas of white, or the white of the paper, for highlights and to try and portray some sort of reflection. But I'm thinking about, you know, the deeper sort of pewter metals that sometimes brooches and clasps are made of. And then hopefully leaving a few highlights will help to imply that it's a reflective surface. And again, Karron has given us a lot of detail to work with and some ideas of where there might be some shading. Then I want a slightly deeper colour. To do some details and deeper shadows. And I'm thinking that maybe the stitching on her cape here can maybe be the same sort of grey. So at this point in time, I'm trying to sort of think about what colours can I make from those original colours that I've got out. So that everything works together and has that common sort of theme. So on the outer edge of that, I want to maybe have a deeper red. so that I can imply a little bit of a shadow along here. And some of this might not necessarily be too apparent yet on the camera there. But if I was to bring the book up to the camera, or indeed when I take photographs later, it might actually be a little bit more obvious what some of this detail is referring to. Now with this edging here, I'm not sure what colour I want to do that just yet. Perhaps a little bit of a do I want that sort of colour? No. That might do for the feather. And then always having that paper towel there to wipe off any excess. And I'm just going to drag that out for some of that detail. So again, just following the lead of Karron, the way she's drawn the feathers there. And sometimes with the grayscale, you don't need to add anything else. You can just leave those little light grayscale details there if you like. I'm going to put some red beads into here, or red tie, or whatever it is. But I just feel like it needs a little bit of red and a little bit of that lighter red. just for that little bit of pop of colour. Against her dark hair. And then I think the bit of Payne's Grey with the blue in could be handy for a little bit of sort of shadowy colour on the brooch. I'm going to do some of that in this shaded area, I think. And again, you can play around with the intensity of the colour, so you can have that one colour with more water, a little bit more diluted. You can have it a bit more concentrated in some areas, and just go around the edge there and try and portray a little bit of a shadow there onto her skin. But I do need a little bit of skin colour to darken that up as well, I think. Just to darken that a little bit around there. And again, the light is getting a bit dull here, and it's getting later in the day. And the reflection from my light for recording on the actual water of the watercolour is making it hard to see some of the details. I don't want to change the colour of that blue too much, but just feel like we needed that little bit of touch of a shadow. So again, I still need to think about what colour that braiding or stitching on her cape needs to be. And let's have a think about this grey. Now up here in her hair, where her hair parts, we don't want too much, but we do need something in there. So I'm going to let that bleed out. And I want the main part of the top of her hair there to be in highlight. Lots of sirens out there again today. And this is where I need to be careful that I don't overdo things. I get carried away sometimes and I lose all of the light freshness that watercolour can create. And then I tend to get a bit gung-ho and lose some of that. I have to get my teeny tiny brush out for some of the details along here. Now also, for better and for worse, watercolour can be reactivated. So if you've done work at an earlier stage and it's too dark and heavy, you can try lifting it off with some water or moving it around with water when you come back to it. So the more concentrated that you've used the paint, the more it's going to move with water back on your page again. So you do need to be aware of that, that you don't make a bit of a mess and re-wet and move, you know, colour that you don't want. Over you know, a nicely painted resolved area or a lighter colour. But you can actually wet it and, you know, lift some back off if you decide that that was a little bit too dark after all. And of course you need to be mindful of where you have painted already, that you don't go putting your hand in somewhere that you don't want smudged. Now I might get that really small brush back out. So let's think about down here a little bit. I was thinking about making it jewellery, but I think I might actually make it look like it's natural. So a little bit of yellow ochre with the burnt sienna, and then a little tiny bit of the Payne's grey. And I'm going to make it look like that she's got natural real plants for jewellery, hopefully. Now, is that a bit of that goes into there, or is that her hair? That's a little bit confusing to work out, actually. And we'll do that up here as well. And that's going into her hair. And I'm going to use a little bit of that colour down here for the bird, for some of its legs, and I will put a bit more grey on there later, I think. I'm also going to put a little bit of that colour into the feathers. And I'd also like to make a bit of a darker brown if I could. And put a little bit of that onto the bird. And I just want a little touch of blue on that top bird. I'm going to pick up a little bit of ultramarine and maybe just put a little bit into the wings. And perhaps a little bit just to give a hint of blue there. And I wanted her eyes to be quite grey, but I might put a little tiny touch of blue into her eyes there. And I'm going to have to darken up the pupil because that's lost the definition there as well. So that's very, very carefully. I might have been better not to have done that. We'll see how that dries. So it's actually the next day now, and I've come back to do a little bit more on this page. And I have just used a little bit of water, gently rubbing at it with a brush and a bit of paper towel to lift a little bit of that colour off there. So that's not so noticeable now, and means that I've got more choice with what I can do with the background. So I don't have so much of a red smudge to actually cover up. So what will I do with that background? I still haven't really decided, to be honest. I was thinking maybe some of the yellow ochre type colour, you know, to have a bit of a natural look, maybe with that and a bit of blue, maybe a bit of Payne's grey, and I'll just mix that up. So all I've done to reconstitute this paint is actually put some water in there, clean water. So it just goes to show that you can reconstitute your paint very easily. So what I'm going to do, I want an abstract background. So I think what I might like to do is have it lighter behind here where it's all the colour is, and darker coming down. We could try that maybe. It's hard for me to explain it, so it might be better if I just dive in. So I'm just going to try and avoid some of those details. And my paper's quite wrinkled and cockled now from all the water, which is going to make it a little bit tricky as well. Maybe what I might do is, let's see if putting a clip on here, that might help. So I'm going to do it sort of quite random and very washy. So what I might do is start with the yellow ochre. Is it yellow ochre? Is that what it's called? Yeah, yellow ochre. And then what I'm going to do is blend other colours into it as we go. So dropping the other colour into it to let it do its own thing and blend on its own. And I want it all to be pretty random. So that's the burnt sienna. And now as I move the water around, it drags that pigment with it. And then here I think I might do a little bit of blue. So this was ultramarine. And over here I'm going to go back to the ochre. So again, mixing up my techniques. I started out with wet in wet, now I'm doing wet on dry. And you really only want to do something like this in the background when your image is completely dry. Otherwise, some of this colour will get sucked in over your actual painting, your subject of your page. So this would be easier with a smaller brush, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that border yet, so I'll try to avoid getting colour on there, but I could possibly use some sort of gel pen to do the border. Now what's going to happen here is the ultramarine and the yellow ochre is going to mix and blend of its own accord there, so we're going to get some interesting colours hopefully. And the same here where the burnt sienna is going to mix and blend with the yellow ochre. You can kind of encourage it, and then you can put some clean water in and let that take the colour wherever it wants to go. So this is very random. Whilst I can control some of it a little bit, the actual end result is going to be quite a surprise, because by the time this paper dries, the pigment will have moved and blended and bled into each other of its own accord. So again, up here in this top corner, we could possibly put a little bit of burnt sienna, and I think the burnt sienna might be nice here. What I'm trying to do is make a bit of a contrast between the colour of the girl and her hair and the bird and the background. And of course, where the paper is all warped and cockled, we've got little valleys where it's taking the paint of its own accord, because water will always look for the lowest point. And that's what it's doing here on the paper as well. You know, because that's what water does. So even right to the last minute, I hadn't thought about putting the burnt sienna in there. And you can see how now this is dictating, because I started and did one thing, it's now dictating where I take the rest of this now. And I'm sorry, you could probably hear my paintbrush catching. I have a couple of boxes that are off to the side here that the lamp is actually sitting on top of, to get the lamp at the right height to hold my phone so I can record. And I'm catching those boxes with my paintbrush. So again, where it's quite wet, I'm just going to feed that yellow ochre into it and see what happens. And then also here I could maybe put some clean water, because I quite like the cauliflower effects. Some people don't, but I actually do. And what that does is the clean water is pushing that pigment away from the clean water, so it's pushing it to the sides, and then you get like a hard edge where it starts to dry, and you get some really unusual effects. Now technically, with a lot of watercolour painting, traditional style watercolour painting, that's a no-no. People are trying to avoid getting that effect, but as I've mentioned to you many times, I don't always follow tradition, and I don't always follow so-called rules. I do what interests me at the time. And if it interests me to experiment and play, that's what I will do. I've been very careful with how I've painted her face, so the main body of the picture, and now it's time to be a little bit more loose and experimental with the background. So that brush is quite big for getting in these little tight spaces. I could switch over to the bigger, smaller brush, but so I'm just going to move that over a little bit, and I'm just going to check that we are still, we don't need to move that over a bit, do we? I can just move this over a bit. So she's turning out to be quite a striking picture. To start with, I thought that it might be a little bit more subtle. Christine Karron's people are drawn in a way that sometimes suggests to me to have much more subtle, nuanced colours, but this one's sort of dictated itself what it's going to be. And as I started to put the colours down, it's taken on a life of its own. And that is what I pretty much like to do with my colouring these days. I know I'm harping on about it a little bit, but when you're creating art for somebody else, so you're either trying to sell it, so you're trying to appeal to a market, or you might have been fortunate enough to pick up a commission. So somebody has actually specifically engaged you to create something for them. There's a lot of pressure to conform to precisely what your customer or client wants, and rightly so. You know, they're paying for something that they want, but as the artist, that is quite a lot of pressure, and some people really thrive and enjoy it and others don't, and I was one of those that don't. The pressure tended to get to me a little bit, having perfectionist tendencies anyway, and then not wanting to let someone down by, you know, producing something that they weren't happy with, or being, you know, rejected because they weren't happy with it, was something that I found very difficult to deal with. It was always easier to try to create something that I enjoyed creating and hopefully would appeal to a customer. So, you know, in a gallery or exhibition sort of setting, you've got a little bit more freedom to do that. I mean, you still have to try and think about who your market might be to some extent, but you do have a lot more freedom than when you pick up a commission. So to get into here, I really need to turn the book around. I'm sorry that I don't like to do that on camera because it's a bit harder for you to see, but I'm going to have to do that, I'm afraid. So I'll just check that we are still on screen. And go back to a slightly bigger brush again. So I think to make it easier for myself, I'll make the decision now to do this darker. So I'm going to actually go over the top rather than paint around all of this detail. So I'm going to take the easy way out. Be careful where I go to, because that bit I'm not wanting colour to go on. So you can see how much easier this is than trying to paint around everything. And I'll put a little bit of blue into there and let that all bleed together, hopefully. So it's not actually meant to look like anything as such, it's just a random abstract background using the colours in the picture. And hopefully it's all going to move and blend and do some fun stuff. And sometimes it's really nice to get a little bit of a very concentrated colour and let that drop in and do its own thing in the water. And again, I need the smaller brush to get into here. So whilst I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do here, I did know that I was going to do a random background like this. So the plan was always to leave it quite washy and random. I just didn't know what sort of colours I was going to use. So let's just turn that back around. And we'll get that back on there. And also I did say about putting a little bit of red in there, didn't I? So a little bit of this red maybe. I think that might look okay in here. I'm going to have to get a very small brush in there to do the details here for the bird's tail and the hair. So again, quite a lot more vibrant and less diluted to get that pop of colour there. And then with some cleaner water, just come up here, and I want it to start blending in with the yellow ochre. Clean water again, just to help move it around. And again here, just to move the paint around. And then when I come back to do the details of the hair and the bird here, I will actually be able to use some darker colour maybe to go over those edges and blend that in. I also need to blend that section of hair in a little bit better as well. Okay, so I am going to have to let that dry, obviously, because that's going to be very easy to smudge, and actually I could probably do with a little bit more of that red. What I find is sometimes when I stand up and I stand back from the page, I see where something might be lacking, or it looks a little bit sort of disjointed. It just needs something extra about it, and giving yourself that space helps you see it a little bit better, because you're not focused on the close details anymore. You're looking at the bigger, broader picture. You can actually see those areas where that could be needed. So don't ever have abrupt changes like there on either side of the hair. you need to follow the colour through just so that your eye doesn't rest on there and think that something's untoward about it, because it's an abrupt, change of colour from one side of the hair to the other. It just looks very unnatural. So you just need to go either side of it to make sure that that blends in a little bit better. Even random abstract things seem to have, a bit of a rhythm about them that you can tell that something's off. Okay, so I won't play with things too much because then the colours turn into mud. And we'll just let that dry and I will come back to you. So I've used a hairdryer to help that along a little bit, and I'm thinking at the end I might need to try an iron on this. Depends how bent it is, because sometimes if you use a iron on it, you actually end up putting more wrinkles into it. So it is quite cockled. So I will do some finer details now to finish off. So I'm going to need very small brush here, and I'm going to get into some of these bits where I've gone close to the edge but not quite when things were wet, and I didn't want it to bleed over into other damp bits. So now I'm just going to very carefully tidy some of that up, and then I'm going to tidy up some of these edges that sorry, words are hard when you're concentrating sometimes. Some of these details from here where the edges weren't very well resolved. And I've been waiting to get in there once I know how deep and dark some of those colours need to be. So again, I'm not going to try and get every single hair. And I'm just trying to get close enough now to tidy up some of these edges, because these things have been painted in a way, especially the face has been painted in a way that needs the tight, crisp edges. The background's very abstract, so you can get away with edges being untidy and a little bit less defined. But because I've done her face quite detailed and quite tight, then the rest of this around this area needs to be tidied up and be, of an equivalent standard of detail. And then as you move away, it can get more loose and abstract. I do hope that some of what I'm saying does make some sense, because it's, as I say, it's very hard sometimes when you're deep in concentration. The mouth tends to run away on autopilot a little bit. And then when I listen back to it later on the edits, I just shake my head at myself and think, what on earth are you rambling on about? this is the Payne's Grey here that I'm using, quite concentrated and undiluted. So this looks a little bit sort of light and not really matching the rest of it. I'll just blend that in a little bit better. And then here where I have not quite gone up to the edge of the hair with the background, just blend that in, hide that. And again, that will dry a little bit lighter. And I did notice that along here is a little bit untidy. I need a couple of fine brushes because these ones I've got are quite old and they're starting to splay out a little bit, so I could do with some really fine small brushes for this sort of thing. So perhaps that's another thing to add to the list for the art store. Excuse me. And of course nobody's hair is perfect, so if you want to, you could do some little flicks of flyaway hair as well. Just help blend those in a little bit tidier. A lot of people like to do the backgrounds first and then they can bring all these details up to it and over it. But you might have been able to tell, but the way that I do things, I do the background towards the end like I did, because I wasn't really 100% sure what colours I wanted in that background, and I didn't want the colours in the background to force my hand to what I had to do with her face. So I prefer to do the face and the subject first, and then worry about those other things later. And even if it makes it a little bit harder for myself, in a odd roundabout way, it just makes more sense to the way my brain works and the way that I think about things. Sometimes, you know, we're not always completely logical. And I thought that these look to me like there might be a little, it could be a little stone in there. So I'm actually going to use some of this very bright red here, which is permanent red light. I'm actually going to do a little touch of that in there, like it's got a stone in there, in that brooch. Now with the leaves, let's see if I can mix a bit of the ultramarine with a little yellow ochre and see what we get. It might be a little bit too dirty to look like green. Yeah. Let's just actually pick some of the green. This is permanent green. And I'm just going to put the tiniest little dash of this on my palette there, because I don't really need very much of this. And I'm actually going to mix that into that colour that I had there. Because I don't want a super vibrant green, because, you know, nothing, it wouldn't go with anything else on the page then. Because I wanted it to look like she had some natural foliage around her neck and on her head as jewellery, rather than making it as in a metal or a precious metal. And there's some little dots and dabs that could potentially be like little flower. They could be okay done with white, I think. Some of them I've left white, but not all of it, and it might not be bright enough. So there's some little dots and dabs around there. And let's just take a little tiny bit of that and put that into a few spots. And they're very small details to be doing with a brush. There's only so much detail that you can do. Just use a little bit of that vibrant green while it's in her hair there, because that kind of suits that area. So I might have to wait for that to dry and then again do a little bit of detail with some less diluted colour. And then just do a teeniest bit of Chinese white. So again, I'm just going to do that on the edge of the palette there. I was just looking to see if I had anything really fine that I could do to dab those little details on with. Now, I'm not sure what I had this for, this tool, but it's a Derwent one, and you may be able to see, is that going to focus on there? It's just got little tiny ends on it. I think it was for embossing, or I can't even remember what I bought it for. Anyway, it's teeny tiny, like a little ball on the end. And that's what I'm going to use to dot a little bit of white paint onto here as little flower buds or dots. Is it the plant called, is it baby's breath or something like that, that has a little tiny white bit of flower on it? And some can be bigger than others. Turn that around a little bit closer, might make a bit more sense, instead of having to lean over everything. Sometimes when I'm recording I forget that I can move things around. So a few bigger ones down the bottom here, I think. So if you didn't have white watercolour, you could do a tiny bit of white acrylic. If you didn't have any acrylic, you could do a bit of white gel pen or something, whatever you've got. That would make a really obvious, brilliant white like this. So I like the way that looks, I think. So I could also do that, because it is so small, just to get that highlight in her eye very white. And I need a little bit of concentrated Payne's Grey here to redo the pupil. So I need to not touch that bit of white. It's the tiniest bit, you know, you really need a gentle touch if you're going to do that with paint. And I've still got to decide what to do with that border. I really don't know what to do with that. Okay, so let's try mixing up a bit of a brown, dark brown. To just do a few more little details of the bird. Just need to tidy up a few details around here. I'd like his legs to be a bit lighter coloured, so I'm darkening the background around there so that hopefully the legs will show up a little bit better. So this sort of thing can either look very pedantic, or it can make the difference between, you know, something that looks very polished and careful versus something that's just missing the mark. And this darker brown can be used for some of the detail now on the twigs and branches. So not necessarily to outline everything, but just give a bit of definition. And it's tricky when something is that small. You just you don't necessarily have to outline everything and have all the details in, but just the right tone and a bit of dark here and a bit of light there suddenly makes something look more realistic. But it's you know, a really fine line between overdoing it and not doing enough. You know, just a little bit of white in the wrong place can be really obvious sometimes. And then by the same token, you know, sometimes you just put a little bit somewhere and it makes all the difference of livening something up. These are the things that are hard to put into words and define. You just sort of know when you see it that, aha, that's what it needed, that's it, that's enough. Just do a few odd stray ones now. Just barely touching the tip of the paintbrush. So I'm going to have to turn that again. Get that to blend into that bit of blue in the background there. And try and do it so that it's not such a hard, obvious edge. I've put a little bit of yellow ochre on the feathers there, and I'm going to actually use a little bit of yellow ochre to do these little ties or binding. So I don't really want it to have a huge amount of colour, but I just want to knock that white, stark white back off of there. And I don't really want to introduce too much colour now, so I just thought that might suggest that perhaps it's some sort of natural twine or something that's been used to sort of sew that up. So that's what I'm going to do, just knock that whiteness back without actually adding too much colour to it. But I'm thinking I'm going to leave the lace on her dress or shirt, whatever it is that's underneath this cape here. I'm going to leave that white because I like the way it plays off against the whites of her eyes. Everything else is quite bold now in its colour. And I thought I might use the Payne's Grey just to put some colour onto this border, and maybe a bit of gel pen or some sort of fine liner maybe for that, to give it a little bit of definition and detail. I don't want those to be bright white. Yeah, so let's get started on that. I don't know if I'll do the whole lot on camera. Sort of a murky non-colour really, just to cover up where she's got the grayscale for now. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on, is the grayscale areas. For now, and maybe even a bit of silver gel pen. you know, and those little leaves. So again, this is going to be hard to get into. So this brush, even though it's fine, it's starting to splay out when I'm trying to do a straight line. So it's past its prime. It is quite old, I've had it a while. Yeah, so over this area where I went over the top of it, that's not going to work so well. So I think I'm going to have to bring in some sort of gel pen or fine liner in all of this area here. So I'm just looking for the hints that Christine has drawn in there with her grayscale. So the bits of shading that she's done for us. So be careful not to put my hand into some wet paint. I might have to dry some things off with the hairdryer, and I'll be back. So I thought what I might use is maybe a bit of white jelly roll and a very, very fine pigment ink pen here. It's a 005. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny little nib, and I thought that that might be helpful for just getting into some of these areas with the birds, because there's some really fine detail that I was having trouble with there. Maybe a few little flicks on the end there. Something still feels tacky and I'm not sure what it is. I'm going to just go around the outside of the details of the brooch. Just to tighten up a few of the little details. So hopefully it won't be really obvious, but it will just make just a tiny bit of difference to some of the detail. a little bit of detail on the foot because it's so tiny and small in there. I just don't have a brush small enough to get me right in there. I think everything on her face is fine, and I just wanted to go around some of this border down here. Just to see if that's worth doing. And it might be. So what I was thinking was I might do something like that, and not sure how good this jelly roll is. So the jelly roll, I thought I could clean up some of these sorts of areas where I've gone over. And just leave it white and grey. So don't actually want it to look like real leaves. So I might do that off camera and see how that comes up, and I will come back. So just to finish up there, I have used a little bit of Jelly Roll Metallic in white to tidy the border up, and I've decided to leave that all sketchy and non-natural so that it creates a separate border to the look of the picture itself. I was going to use some silver metallic on it and then thought better of it. I've used a very small 005 fine liner pen to go around and tidy up the edge of the border with a bit of a stronger line. I used a little bit of pen just in the foliage around her neck, the headpiece, and on the brooch, a tiny little bit on the birds as well, just to tidy some areas up that were much too small for me to get in with a brush, and namely the feet and so on. And then when it was completely dry, I used a cool iron, so I had it on the setting that you would do for silk. I had several pieces of clean copy paper either side of the page, and I ironed the page. It's not completely flat, you can see that it is still cockling a little bit, but it's far better than it was. It was very, very bumpy and wavy because I've used quite a bit of water on there. So that has tidied that up a little bit. I also wanted to show you that there is no real bleed through on the other side. There is obviously signs of water being used, but there is no bleed through. this paper does cope quite well with a decent amount of water. And just to finish off, I wanted to show you that that is how much paint is left in the palette. I can cover that with a bit of cling wrap, a bit of plastic, or something covering it, and keep using that paint for as long as I want. And it just goes to show you that although I only had small little dobs of paint, apart from the Payne's Grey I got a bit heavy-handed with, you can see just how little I've used. There's still quite a lot of that yellow ochre there, a big lump of ultramarine there, so a bit of red. So you really don't need very much paint at all. It goes a very long way. So your investment in watercolours in tubes will last you for a very long time, providing you look after your paint and store it correctly. So that's what's left in the palette. And I thought I would just talk you through how the paints come. So the Van Gogh watercolour set, they do come in a box like this. And then the paints are in a plastic storage case, which is very sturdy. And then you can open that, and more thumbs again. So the plastic storage case can be used as a mixing palette. You can mix colours in the lid there. You do get a brush with it, and 12 colours. So Chinese white, lemon yellow, yellow medium, permanent red light, madder lake deep, cobalt blue, ultramarine deep, permanent green, viridian, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and Payne's Grey. So you can do really well with 12 colours there. You can mix lots of colours from that, and as you can see from the result here, watercolours do not need to be wishy-washy. They can be used very, very subtly and really gently. Or you can use them and get a super vibrant result like I have here, and I think they're a lot of fun. It is a slower process to colour, in a colouring book especially, but it's a very nice process. So if you have the time and the space to be able to sit and immerse yourself fully in the process of mixing some colours and painting, it's very, very relaxing, and I feel the result is really worth spending the time doing that. Would I colour with them every day? Probably not, but they are certainly a very nice medium to have in your collection of art supplies for colouring books and your own original art, if that's the sort of thing you like to do. So obviously results on watercolour paper will be far superior to what you're going to get on a colouring book page, but I think this has turned out really well for a colouring book page. I am more than happy with the way that has worked. So it has been 2 afternoons of painting that I have just fully immersed myself in and had a great time. So a huge thank you to the people at Royal Talens Australia for allowing me to try these lovely watercolours in tubes. And if you are on Instagram, do go and check out their Instagram page. And if you're not here in Australia, just look for Royal Talens. And Royal Talens are available in many countries around the world. So thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions, pop them into the comment box for me, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. And until the next time, I hope you have a great time creating and colouring in your own books, and I'll see you then. Bye now.